Hi, everyone. Welcome. This is HMC101. And our assumption for this session is that you're operating in a multi-cloud environment or planning to do so. Can you raise your hand if that's the case? All right, if your hand is down, this would be a good time to leave. You're still sitting, good. I'm Ellie, and this is Shankar.
Hello.
And I lead the AWS multi-cloud program, which means we provide cloud-agnostic support to customers operating in a multi-cloud environment. That includes thought leadership, it includes strategic consulting, best practices, and agnostic means that we might not even recommend specific services to one cloud or another, we may recommend them all. So we're gonna take you through our session today, and let's have fun.
We're here to provide cloud-agnostic guidance, right? So architectural patterns and services in the way you would string them together, what kind of patterns you should look for. Here's what we have in store for you.
First thing, this is a foundational session. So if you have a lot of experience in running a multi-cloud environment, you may be aware of these topics. You may learn things you don't already know, but just to level set, this is our foundational strategic guidance. Now, as far as what we'll cover today, we're gonna start with what we hear from customers, voice of customer, feedback we've gotten. We'll introduce the multi-cloud readiness framework. This is one of the ways we guide customers to prepare for having a multi-cloud environment. We'll then go through some of our best practices, what we share with customers that come to our program to get information, and we'll make sure to end with some key takeaways for you to know, including some other sessions we recommend for you to join this week. So as I said, my name is Ellie, and I lead the business side of the multi-cloud program at AWS. We have over 150 specialists that have mastered these topics. They either have certifications from other clouds, or they have experience deploying AWS services on other clouds, so they can provide that guidance. Think about this as a consultative experience. We work with our customers long term. It's not a one-time thing. Whatever it is that you need, we're happy to provide and bring the right experts to support you. And Shankar?
I lead the technical practice area in AWS. And first, I'd like to start by telling you what are we hearing from our customers, right? We talk to a lot of multi-cloud customers, and we capture a few themes, right? So I just want to highlight a few of those themes that are worth bringing up to you. First is the flexibility. Most customers, this is from a global telecom company, tell us that they adopt multi-cloud strategies because they're looking for the flexibility that adopting multi-cloud strategies gives them. In this case, they're adopting 3 clouds, right? The second quote comes from a large enterprise. This is also an ISV. They're further along in their multi-cloud journey. And really what I want to highlight here is the fact that they have standardized on some enterprise-level principles, right? Here, they're standardizing on the architectural principle of adopting open source, which is a very common theme we've seen with very many large customers on this multi-cloud journey, right? The third quote is from a consumer genomics company, and it highlights how we're seeing this Gen AI fueling the multi-cloud adoption and vice versa. In this case, this customer really wants to adopt what we call best-of-breed AI services, right? So they just want to be able to innovate and adopt AI services across from different cloud providers or partners. Where it comes from is not of any concern to them, right? So there is this trend of how Gen AI is fueling the customer's multi-cloud strategies, right? We also see that there are a few motivations, right? And I'm going to poll the room a little over here as well. There are some pan-global themes that we see. If you're an ISV, you're probably going to look for a multi-cloud strategy because you want to serve your customers where they are. You might be in a mergers and acquisitions kind of a scenario, which is a very, very common scenario. Maybe a quick poll, who here in this room came to the multi-cloud land through an M&A? Show of hands. Okay, some, right? We also see some geo-wide trends. This is not to say that this is just happening in one particular geo, but this is what we see more predominantly, right? Like for example, in North America, we see customer contracts often drive multi-cloud strategy. In EMEA, we often see, or Europe, we often see regulatory requirements dictate the customer's multi-cloud strategy, as well as in Asia, we see that topics such as resilience are guiding customers' sort of motivations towards looking at multi-cloud, right? These are some of the trends. Are you seeing something else too?
Well, in a lot of cases, we see customers mention several ones. So we want to avoid lock-in, and we also want to take advantage of differentiating capabilities.
Yeah.
And we might end up with regulatory requirements, so it could be a few. There are definitely cases where we hear we're multi-cloud because of executive guidance. And it could be that we had companies where they had a change of executive leadership, and an executive came in with an experience from another cloud provider, and they want to push that. But the most important thing for us to remember is that some of these use cases aren't solved by just adding another cloud, right? Because if you want to avoid lock-in, just adding another cloud isn't going to get you there. We talk about architecting for portability. If you're talking about resilience as a use case, for example, that's very nuanced because adding another cloud doesn't make you more resilient. It actually could make you less resilient, right? So we help customers think about these situations where adding another cloud can help you reach that use case. And one of the things we always ask our customers is, let's start with why. What was the reason you opted to operate in multi-cloud? What is that end use case we're hoping to get to? Because if we don't know where we're going, what the destination is, it's going to be very hard for us to pave the way to get there. So if we drill down onto why are you operating in a multi-cloud environment, what value do you expect to get out of operating in a multi-cloud environment, it will help us to guide you along that way and to reach that success.
So to level set, I think it will be super meaningful to define the term multi-cloud. I'm sure each one of you have your own definitions, but for the sake of this session and for the other multi-cloud sessions at reInvent, we define the use of multi-cloud as the use of multiple cloud providers for meaningful workloads. This means that we are automatically excluding, let's say, your use of some kind of a SaaS solution that might be running in a cloud provider that's not your primary. That is not the use case we're talking about. While that might still be a bona fide multi-cloud use case, for the sake of this session, we're talking about using 2 or more cloud providers to operate meaningful business workloads.
As a strategic business decision. So if somebody's playing around with, let me just, launch a workload on another cloud.
That's different. All right. And as we listen in and, we've observed a few patterns. I have to say, this is my most favorite slide, okay? I like ice creams, okay? And we see that there are a few distinct patterns, right? On the left, you see customers adopting multi-cloud in what we call a discrete manner. You might just have a workload in cloud provider A and another workload in cloud provider B. For all practical purposes, they are just sitting there in their clouds doing their own thing. They're not talking to each other. While you might just have a portfolio of multiple clouds, they are just ice creams in 2 different cones, right? And the second category is what we call integrated, where you might have workloads that are in multiple clouds, and some of them are actually interfacing with another. Maybe you have data here that is accessed over there in another workload, in another CSP, and that's your middle sort of multiple scoops bowl. And then further along is what we call the flexible mode, right? Where you're really trying to offer to your builders an environment that is agnostic to what is the underlying cloud that is going to actually support that workload. So you're taking off all of that undifferentiated heavy lifting and you're adopting this swirly of multiple clouds, so to say, right?
And when we ask customer, we say, what is your goal? Because this doesn't necessarily mean maturity. It just may mean a different business strategy. Some of our customers want to move towards flexible multi-cloud, and they want to have abstraction. They want to have full control planes observability, right? We call this a single pane of glass, and we don't use that phrase anymore because it became a single glass of pain. Nobody can actually tell you what that means, single. It's never single, right? So we need to understand, what is it that you're hoping to achieve? Are you looking for that combined, integrated, multi-cloud strategy? Or just operating multiple clouds with maybe one central control plane?
Yeah, you could have any kind of ice cream you want, okay?
Any flavor.
All right, that brings us to the multi-cloud readiness framework, which is a structured way in which we would recommend customers go through their multi-cloud adoption, right? So we've been working with a lot of customers over the years, building out this framework that touches upon different layers from enterprise strategy through architecture all the way up to AI, right? As we walk through this presentation, you will see that we keep leaning in on this particular framework, and we hinge our best practices and our guidance as well as our capabilities, services, and other sort of guidance and things that we have to offer to you along this framework so that you can be ready as you go about multi-cloud adoption, right? But in practice, multi-cloud, how does multi-cloud deployment actually look? So we often use this airlines analogy for that.
This is my favorite analogy for going multi-cloud. Let's assume you have one fleet of airplanes, and your life is easy. Because if you think about your people, they're all trained on this one fleet of airplanes. Your pilots all know how to fly all your planes. Your staff, they know how these airplanes work. They know where everything goes, right? It's very easy. We don't have to train them on other models of airplanes. Same with the process. If a customer makes a booking, the booking system, all the same. Even if I have to swap out airplanes, seats are the same. They can still sit where they booked, right? And technology, let's think about spare parts if I only have one airplane model fleet. My warehouse will just have these spare parts that I need for that one model airplane. But what happens if, like an M&A, I want to expand and I end up purchasing a different fleet? Now I have some thinking to do. What about my people? Are they all going to be trained on all the different models, or do I have specialization? What about my process? How do I have to change it now in order to support the fact that it might not always be the same exact airplane? And technology, we're now looking at complications when it comes to technology. How do I actually change my tech stack to support the fact that I now have two different fleets? And then let's talk about the part where we're now adding a third fleet. Now things get even more complicated. And now I have different hubs. Are all the different planes going to be in all the hubs? Are they going to be just specific routes for special planes? They're going to do those, but what happens when they reach a different one? What if I have to swap them out? That helps people that don't have IT experience or knowledge, and when we talk to executives, we sometimes have to go through explaining how adding all of these different clouds increases your complexity, and it can increase the cost. So going back to where we started, we better have a use case because we want to measure that ROI. I've just added complexity, I've added costs, I've added work in order to manage this complex environment. I want to make sure I get my value out of it.
And of course, everybody wants to get to the promised land, so to say, right? And you really want to get to the point where you are more efficient than you were when you were with a single fleet of gray airplanes. And you can get there, right? But you need clarity, as Ellie's been talking about, around what are the KPIs that you're going to measure yourself over? Have you actually thought through all of the people, process, technology considerations? But eventually, we do see customers succeed and really organize their fleets in a meaningful way and so on, right? But, that's as far as this analogy goes. So let's come back to the cloud, right?
We know more about the cloud than we do about managing airline fleets anyway.
Yes. So just to summarize that part, right? We spoke about 3 distinct deployment models. And I want to emphasize this, right? These are discrete. These are distinct, and you have integrated and the flexible. It's not like you need to go from discrete over to integrated and then to flexible, even though it might look like that. If your business needs propel you to go from, let's say, discrete through integrated and the flexible, then you would do so. But you're perfectly fine establishing your baseline on discrete and staying there. You're a happy camper right there, or at integrated, or a flexible, right? So now let's look at what are some best practices in AWS capabilities. And we're going to hinge this back on our readiness framework, right? All the way from enterprise strategy. So we will start with the enterprise strategy layer. We'll see what are some best practices that we would recommend you adopt towards multi-cloud readiness, right? So I'm going to bring this back to the discrete, integrated, and flexible deployment models, and you're going to see the same sort of visual repeat, okay? At that discrete deployment model, we would recommend that you definitely rationalize your multi-cloud investment. Start with the why, because if you're not able to articulate in clear business case terms why you're doing what you're doing from a multi-cloud strategy perspective, then it's very difficult to make any sense of it, even if you are going further along in the integrated path, right? As you go to, let's say, an integrated model of deployment, here is where we would definitely recommend that you take a serious look at what is the skill set in your team. Are they really ready to operate effectively in a multi-cloud environment? How do you identify what is the skills gap and how are you going to address that, right? And also, eventually, your success with multi-cloud strategy is going to reflect your overall organizational structure, right? So you need to make sure that you think through how you're going to proactively and consciously design your team structures to be able to succeed with your multi-cloud strategy. Eventually, to succeed in the flexible deployment, whatever strategy you've put in place, you want to make sure that you've defined it as a policy. Better still, an automated policy, right? So you want to put all of this such that, let me take an example, right? What about workload placement, right? So it is one thing to say that I'm adopting Cloud A for this and Cloud B for that, but you need to be able to programmatically govern that, right? You need to be able to influence your builders in a way such that either this decision is off their plates or they know exactly where a workload is supposed to go, right? So you need to put your multi-cloud strategy as a policy and automate that. So now let's look at some AWS capabilities that align with these best practices. At that discrete level, we've been talking about the readiness framework. We would highly recommend that you evaluate if this is the right kind of framework for your organization. It likely is. If not, it's based on an open standards-based, open alliance approach. So you can take this, make your own, and make your own readiness framework out of this as a baseline, right? But make sure you have a clear, structured approach towards this. At that integrated level, we've been delivering what we call the School of Multi-Cloud, which is training and enablement for your team. It's been globally very successful, and we're happy to come and help equip your team to be able to operate in a multi-cloud environment. This is both technical as well as non-technical, and in the technical realm, this goes pretty deep around all of the topics that come to your mind: operations, security, data, AI, networking, and more, right? At that flexible level is when I would recommend that you start thinking about contextualizing your approach for your vertical, right? For example, we've got published best practices guidance, multi-cloud best practices guidance for FSI, for financial services, right? So you want to start adopting your vertical specific best practices and guidance, right? So that's at that enterprise strategy layer. Let's look at the next layer, which is the foundations you need to lay in order to frankly succeed in any of the layers above. This is a very wide topic. It encompasses everything from operations, security, observability, FinOps, networking. I can go on, right? But let's dive into it straight. At the discrete deployment level, our recommendation is that you definitely start with prioritizing security, applying consistent security policies across your clouds. Honestly, your security team, your central security team doesn't really care whether your workload is running on cloud A or cloud B. What they care about is what regulation your organization needs to adhere to. So you need to make sure that you're applying consistent security policies across all of your clouds. You also need to make sure that you have unified observability. We see a lot of customers, come and approach us around how do we develop internal developer portals and so on. You can do all of that, and we can help you with guidance, with different mechanisms that help you make that happen easily. But honestly, you need unified observability, centralized operations before you can have any of that happen, right? At that integrated level is when we would recommend that you start thinking through how you're going to design your cloud-to-cloud connectivity, redundant multi-cloud networking. And if you've not been following the most recent announcements, we have a multi-cloud interconnect service that can help you with this piece, right? Also, here is when your cloud spend across different providers actually becomes meaningful enough that you need to adopt robust multi-cloud FinOps practices. Hopefully, you have already adopted FinOps practices for a single CSP usage. This is a topic that we've been drumming down for years now. As you go around multi-cloud adoption path, you should look into adopting multi-cloud FinOps practices as well. And at that flexible level is when you want to start evaluating if abstraction layers make sense to you, right? Some customers think of these as internal developer portals. Essentially, these are vending machines for your builders to be able to get cloud environments that are regulated, structured, has the necessary security policies, has the necessary observability tools already built in. We have a number of sessions in reInvent that kind of touch upon these topics as well, and I'll come to that towards the end of this talk. But here is where I would recommend that you evaluate internal developer portals or abstraction layers like these, right? So let's talk about some AWS capabilities that can help you implement these best practices, right? At the discrete level, we have hands-on workshops that your builders can leverage to get experience and sometimes even actually full-blown deploy different solutions. For example, we have a one observability workshop that can help you deploy managed Grafana environment across clouds. So you can really set up your environment through these workshops or at least get hands-on experience learning, right? We would also recommend that you standardize on different industry practices such as OTel for observability or NIST standards for security. And also we have a whole host of AWS services that can help you at this discrete level around centralized operations, whether it be SSM or whether it be something else, right? So I'd encourage you to take a look at AWS services as well. By the way, something I didn't mention was that you can observe there is a lot of color going on in this slide. That's deliberate. We earlier touched upon how there is a people process as well as a technology element. And the color coding is essentially to help you navigate which are all the people-oriented guidance and capabilities versus those that are process and technology related. At the integrated level is when I would recommend that you adopt standards such as Focus. Focus is a cost and usage specification that has been agreed upon by different cloud providers, AWS, GCP, Azure, and more. AWS is a part of the FinOps Foundation, which owns the Focus specification, and it helps you kind of bring all of your cost and usage data in a single, known format so that you can make sense out of whether the data is coming from AWS or whether your usage data is coming from another cloud provider, right? And to this end, to simplify all of this for you, we would also recommend that you look into the multi-cloud FinOps dashboard. There is a demo of this at our kiosk, so stop by. You can see how this looks like in action as well. But you don't need to do anything more than go and turn on Focus and then leverage this FinOps dashboard to get your multi-cloud cost visibility. At that flexible deployment model, we would encourage you to, number one, take a look at our best practices that are there in the Open Alliance, open source based CNOE, the CNOE, we say CNOE for short, right? Which is a consortium of which AWS as well as a lot of large enterprises are a part of. It helps you adopt a lot of cloud native operational excellence best practices. That's what CNOE stands for. It not just tells you how you should think through operational excellence, it also allows you to deploy internal developer portals right there. It's open source. You can deploy it as is, you can extend it if you want, and a lot of large enterprises do actually adopt these internal developer portals, right? We'd also recommend that you take a look at a few open source solutions that can help you with multi-cloud Kubernetes fleet management. There's a reason I'm talking about Kubernetes. A lot of customers think Kubernetes in tandem with multi-cloud. And while it might be easy if your builder is just experimenting in another cloud and they deploy a few Kubernetes containers, once this comes at scale, you really need to think about how you're going to manage your multi-cloud fleet across different providers, right? For which we have seen customers adopt different multi-cloud solutions, of which AWS has contributed to as well, Argo CD, Crow, all of which helps you with multi-cloud fleet management. Again, we have a demo on this in our multi-cloud kiosk at the expo floor, so come and check it out, you can learn more. We also have a whole host of not just AWS professional services who can come and help deploy different sort of solutions in tandem with multi-cloud, as well as AWS partners who can come and help you if you need additional people help with this, right? Okay, let's move on. What about architecture? At the discrete level, what I'd recommend is that as an organization, you need to come together to determine what are your architectural principles that matter to you. Is it portability? Is it interoperability? Maybe it's both. as well as maybe you want to standardize on open source. But the key thing is, number one, standardize on your principles, and number two, it needs to be cloud agnostic. You cannot say my architectural principle is to use serverless with Lambda. That's not an architectural principle. Okay. You could say that this type of a workload, this type of a business workload that is best suited for serverless, and we would recommend that builders adopt a serverless pattern. That is cloud agnostic architectural principle, right? A lot of customers here, as I alluded to earlier in the quotes, standardize on open source, right? We have customers here at reInvent talking about their path along this as well, right? Adobe is here, right? So you should go and check out that session. I'll leave a pointer to that at the end as well. At that integrated level, whatever architectural principle you've laid out before, you want to take them, build out blueprints that your builders need to adopt, and you want to really socialize this through a construct such as the Cloud Center of Excellence, CCOE for short, right? A lot of customers, I suspect over here as well, have an existing CCOE. So your best bet is to be able to put these blueprints and socialize this and structure this via a mechanism such as the CCOE, right? And typically, at that flexible deployment model, we see that all of these blueprints that you have established before is now available as, think of these as cards that your builders could sort of pick out from based on a set of specifications that is available at an internal developer portal, right? So if I'm a builder in a large enterprise that's having a flexible deployment model, I'll come to an IDP and I'll say, this is the kind of application I'm trying to build, click, 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 and that's going to give me a blueprint, and it's going to say, click to deploy this, and you want to get to that point, right? An abstraction layer integration. So from a capabilities perspective, we would recommend that whatever principles you have aligned on as an organization, you tie that in tandem with the well-architected principles in the framework. Hopefully you're familiar with the AWS well-architected framework. It's been in existence as long as I've been in AWS, which is quite a long time. And when it was built to be cloud agnostic, right? So certainly, if you want to pick out principles from the framework, that will work well, or whatever you pick out, you want to see if it aligns well with the well-architected framework, and it'll also give you some additional considerations to think through, right? At the integrated level, we'd invite you to partner with us around building your multi-cloud CCOE. We've done that successfully for customers, and we have a very prescriptive playbook on how customers can actually go about building these multi-cloud CCOEs, right? At the flexible level, we would recommend that you look at, industry-specific best practices that actually tie back to what kind of architectural patterns you want to adopt. Like, for example, we have a best practice guidance for the financial services that is very prescriptive on what kind of architectures fit best for different use cases, right? Okay, so finally, we're on to our two pinnacle pieces, data and AI. We're going to cover both of these together, right? Simply because we often see that this is a very interlinked topic whenever it comes to customer discussions. If you want to have a successful multi-cloud AI strategy, then you need to have thought through your multi-cloud data strategy effectively, right? Therefore, we're talking about this in tandem. Okay, so at that discrete level, what we would recommend is that you really think about what kind of guardrails you're going to put in place for your multi-cloud data and AI, right? what does this look like in practice? Maybe maybe you're a healthcare organization, and your guardrails would be how you want to either obfuscate PII and PHI, personally identifiable information or personal health information, and what kind of guardrails you want to put in terms of how AI would be able to use that data, right? So it's guardrails not just in terms of what kind of data you have, but also how your models would leverage that data. What data can it use? What data can't it use, right? And as you move to the integrated deployment model, you really want to start thinking about how you do effective capacity planning. In working with customers, we see that some of their best laid plans in terms of data strategy and AI strategy often hinges on how much capacity is there in the providers that you use. And often I see that customers this is the trigger point for multi-cloud itself, right? Because maybe you were on one provider leveraging one model because your data was there, and you realize that that provider has only that much capacity. So how are you going to effectively succeed in your multi-cloud strategy? You do that by doing proactive and effective capacity planning, right? And also, as you move to an integrated deployment model is when you start really paying attention to, are you effectively tracking data quality, data lineage? Where was this data born? Who changed this where? And which AI model is allowed to use it how, right? So what is your mechanism in your organization to track data lineage? It becomes extremely important to track these points, right? And at the flexible deployment model is when we would recommend that you start thinking through how you're going to democratize data and AI usage. The vast majority of our data conversation often start here, but before you start succeeding in this, you need to put all of what I've spoken about in place. The guardrails, the capacity planning, the data lineage, and so on. What do we mean by democratizing multi-cloud data and usage? Maybe you have data in multiple clouds, you're leveraging models across different providers, maybe even different partners, right? And you want to go to a model where your builders are able to leverage services and models for AI irrespective of where your data actually resides. Your producers are able to produce the data and able to hand it over to some kind of a centralized data team. And you have your consumers on the other end who in many cases might be even producers, so they might be prosumers, so to say, right? And the consumers in turn are able to leverage the data from the data team. So you have producers, your data team, and then your consumers, right? That's the ideal democratization model where you have self-serviceability for the consumers and your producers can produce without actually thinking about anything else, right? Okay. So what kind of AWS capabilities can help you with implementing these best practices, right? Recently, we announced the well-architected responsible AI lens, which lays out a lot of the best practices and how you should think about what considerations you should have, especially at that discrete deployment model. So I'd encourage you to check that out. I think it speaks well to the best practices that we advocated for in the prior slide. At that integrated level is when we would recommend that you check out the AWS services, whether that be Agent Core or Athena or more, that can help you with multi-cloud data and AI, right? At the flexible level is when you want to start considering whether you need something like a data mesh architecture, which precisely helps you do the producers, the consumers, and the data team. We have at least 2 sessions at reInvent that helps you think through this. So again, I'll give you some pointers towards the end as you go through the convention, as you go through the conference. Think through whether this makes sense for your organization, right? But we have a lot of guidance that is already published on this. I'd encourage you to go and check out the guidance around this, right? So that brings us to the key takeaways.
Okay, so we talked about thinking about our people, process, and technology. The most important thing that we stress is that our strategy shouldn't be determined by the services we use, by our people, by our processes. It's the other way around. Once we define your multi-cloud strategy with you, or once you come to us with a defined multi-cloud strategy, then we can move forward and think about all the different aspects and the different recommendations that we have for each. As far as AWS is concerned, it doesn't matter what your cloud architecture is. It doesn't matter where your workloads are. It doesn't matter which CSPs you chose to use. The multi-cloud program and our team provide consultancy at no cost. It's part of our service to our customers in order to help them navigate this complex environment. So we will hold your hand, take you through these. Obviously, we shared these, the strategy and best practices in a very high level, but as we work with customers, we work with them long term. So we start with that definition. What is our goal? Are we going to stay discrete? Do we want to go all the way to flexible? And then where do we have to make adjustments in our people, process, and technology in order to succeed with that use case? All right. In addition, the multi-cloud program not only provides you with enablement and that guidance, we also release thought leadership. We help customers write an exit strategy. Yes, even if it's off of AWS. If you need an exit strategy document, you need a policy for your regulators, we'll gladly help you develop it. We have customers who say, I want to know if I'm putting the right workload on the right cloud, and they look for that workload placement strategy. And if they don't have one, yes, we can help you develop your own. We'll help you define the different dimensions, how to reduce risk as you make your workload placement strategies. And it could be that it's led by organizational dimensions, it could be risk reduction, it could be, what are we talking about, performance-led. It could, for any reason, we can help your builders, regulations of course, we can help you to build those dimensions for you and to come up with this document, which hopefully will be programmatized, of where to put your workloads.
All right, so I want to leave you with some next steps, right? At reInvent, we actually have a good catalog of multi-cloud sessions for you to go and check out. And this being the first day, I think is extremely meaningful to help you navigate, right? So at the foundations layer, we have sessions covering security, networking, observability, FinOps, and I alluded to our most recent announcement around AWS Interconnect multi-cloud. If you want to know more about how to do multi-cloud networking along with this new service, check out our networking session, right? So I've just left you with some codes. So, you know, if you plug this into the reInvent catalog, you can see them. But essentially, it covers at the foundations layer. Then we got more sessions at the architecture layer. At this layer, we're talking about how do you do for example, multi-cloud Kubernetes fleet management. How do you think through multi-cloud resilience, which is an extremely nuanced topic. We have Monzo Bank, who is here to talk about how they think about multi-cloud resilience. So check it out. Again, bunch of codes for you to look at. And at that data and AI layer, we have another 4 sessions for you. One that talks to how do you think through from data strategy all the way to your AI usage, to chalk talks that are completely dedicated to how do you effectively build your data strategy, or how do you effectively implement GenAI based solutions, right? So if you want to take a photo of this, I'll leave it on for a second, but I think this is very meaningful for you to plan your days at reInvent, right, if you will, right? I'll leave this on for a few seconds, and then we will move on, okay? We also have a multi-cloud kiosk at the expo floor, the AWS Village. Come and check us out. We've got demos. We've got demos on multi-cloud FinOps. We got a demo on Kubernetes, multi-cloud fleet management. We also have a demo on multi-cloud data and AI, where we talk about agentic AI orchestration across clouds with data spread between Google and AWS, and it's fantastic. Come and talk to us, right? We're going to hang out there, so if you have any deep dive questions, come and ping us. We're happy to engage with you. And of course, we also have the executive briefings, right? So if in case you haven't already leveraged this, you can actually go up to the Venetian 4th floor for an ad hoc EBC. And we'll be
just
happy
talk to your account manager, let them know that you want to meet with our team, and they can schedule an executive briefing, and we can spend an hour with you and help you specifically with whichever topics you'd like to raise.
Yeah. And lastly, 2 resources I want to leave you with. One is the multi-cloud landing page, and number 2, the dedicated multi-cloud blog channel for any sort of future announcements and more, right? That's it. Don't forget to complete the feedback in the mobile.